Alright, things should get a lot clearer and much more real if we see it in code. So let's wire it all up. The very first thing we have to do is to create an interface. We'll call it iDatabase, and let's put in some example commands here. So connect will return an IDB connection, another interface you set up. You can create various commands, and then you can execute commands returning a result. Then you'll create two implementations of this interface. One to deal with an MS SQL database and another to deal with an Oracle database. So you'll have a class, let's call it MS SQL database, which implements iDatabase, and another called Oracle database, which again implements the iDatabase interface. There will be code specific to SQL Server and Oracle in each of these implementations. However, what these implementations can do is driven by the interface and remains the same across both these implementations. So we have the classes which we want to instantiate. Let's do the next step now. We create a member variable of type iDatabase to which each of these instances can be assigned. So that's a very simple piece of code. We'll just say database factory dot get database and assign the result to a database member variable. The two important things here are the member variable has to be of the interface type. This is so that it can be switched from MS SQL database to Oracle database when we make the switchover. The second thing is that the instantiation is done using a static method on the factory class. Database factory has a static method called getDatabase, which is called to get the correct instance. Let's move on to the next step. Now we look at what the database factory class looks like. We can have a static method which uses reflection to create the right object. So we have the database factory, we have the static method getDatabase within it, and this particular method will use reflection to get the right instance of a database based on whether we have switched over or not. There's a lot of stuff going on here. Let's see this one at a time. The first thing to note is that we use reflection to instantiate the correct database after reading what database we want to instantiate from a config file. So the very first line reads from config. We want to know the value associated with database -class -name. That is the key. We want to know the value that is specified in the config file for this key. Once we get the database class name, we simply say class.forName and create a new instance. This is how you create a new instance using reflection. And what it returns is an iDatabase interface implementation. And we simply return this implementation. Now we have to get the class name from the config file. The config file, as we discussed earlier, consists of a whole number of key value pairs. We can specify the database class name with database-class-name as the key, and initially the MS SQL database as the value. Later, once the switchover has happened, we simply edit the config file to change the name of this database class name key to point to Oracle database. So the value now becomes Oracle database. The code remains exactly the same. Read from config, all of which will remain the same. However, since the database class name returned by read from config will switch over from MS SQL database to Oracle database, it will return the correct instance based on what we wanted to return. That's it. That is the factory pattern.